Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Donoghue. I am delighted to have been given the honour to summarise what happened yesterday at the first day of the first regional review of the Global Compact on Migration for the UNECE region. I had an involvement with the New York Declaration, which gave birth to the two global compacts on migration and refugees, respectively, and I followed closely developments in relation to both ever since. So I'm delighted that we now have had an excellent start to the first regional review relating to this region. As one of the participants put it yesterday, this review meeting fills the Global Compact on migration with life. And indeed, we saw that yesterday in very rich and stimulating discussions which involved numerous member states and even more numerous stakeholders from all backgrounds. So we got off to an excellent start, and the purpose of recapping what happened yesterday is primarily to inform those who are joining the meeting for the first time. So I ask others to bear with me briefly. The Director General of the IOM, Antonio Vitorino, and he's also coordinator of the UN Migration Network, described the participants in this review as pioneers as we chart the way forward in relation to regional reviews. We all want to see the Global Compact succeed at the global, national and regional levels. But as Antonio Vitorino remarked, most international migration, in fact, takes place within regions, and therefore these meetings are of particular importance. The Director General gave a very encouraging account of progress which has been made so far in implementing the Compact, both in terms of national plans which are being developed. He referred also to the Multi-Partner Trust Fund, which has provided financing for 6 programs, and indeed there was a welcome announcement from Germany yesterday of further assistance. He referred also to the UN coordination structures of which we're aware. He mentioned also the GCM champions and so on. So all of this is very encouraging at a challenging time. Indeed, the COVID-19 was one of the major themes which came up yesterday, not surprisingly. It gives really added urgency to what we are doing. We all know that migrants have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. There has been a freeze on mobility. Many of them have found themselves in detention as borders have closed. Inequalities have deepened. Vulnerabilities have been exacerbated. But at the same time, migrants are coming into their own in many societies because of the vital contribution they are making on the front line, as it were, as key workers in many sectors. And so we can regard the pandemic as, on the one hand, an enormous challenge, but on the other hand, it opens up opportunities to improve the perceptions of the role of migrants and to bring about practical reforms in many areas which are covered in the Global Compact. Much attention was also paid to the links between the Global Compact and the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. Indeed, we can regard these almost as complementary, that the implementation of the Global Compact will itself make a major contribution to implementation of the SDGs worldwide. The whole of society commitment was emphasised by many speakers yesterday, and we had very valuable expressions of this in the wide range of interventions from stakeholders, as I say, from many different backgrounds. This had been assisted, of course, by the consultations held in advance of this review and also by the various national contributions made. Among the many points which I would pick out from yesterday's roundtable one, I recall one person suggesting that the pandemic is both an invitation to pursue implementation of the compact, but it also asks us to rethink how we actually do things in this new issue of improving access to basic services, how we can better enable remittances, etc. So once again, the pandemic as an opportunity which must be grasped. Many detailed proposals were put forward from civil society and others about individual measures which could strengthen what we have set out to do under the individual objectives. There were references made to good practices. For example, Italy and Portugal, what they are doing on regularization, and my own country, Ireland, in relation to the access being provided to services for all, irrespective of their migratory status. The importance of measures to enhance integration and inclusion was also emphasized. The potential of cities and local governments to take important initiatives across the whole range of the Global Compact. Overall, the importance of coordination, coherence, and collaboration, for example, the UN Migration Network itself, but also cooperation within regions and at national level. Detailed attention was paid to the predicament of, for example, women migrant workers or children, various communities who are particularly affected by the challenges we've been talking about. And there were references also to the need for inclusive approaches in specific sectors such as education and health. Roundtable 2 was no less enriching. Panelists and participants covered the areas, many areas around labour mobility, labour migration, fair recruitment, recognition of skills, the importance of bilateral cooperation and of cooperation with countries of origin, the impact of climate change, the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19, the importance of debt relief and sustainable and the removal of conditionality in financing. I'll end by noting one particular comment made yesterday, which was, coming back to the pandemic, that the pandemic is, that the Global Compact on Migration is, in fact, of major importance to countries in combating the pandemic because of the attention it pays to the need for strengthened health systems and many other fundamental issues for migrants. With that, I hand back to the moderator, and I look forward very much to today's sessions, which I've no doubt will be equally stimulating. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this recap of day 1 and your warm words. So this opens day 2 of the UNECE 2020 Regional Review of the Global Compact for Migration. We have foreseen now a panel of distinguished speakers led by Ms. Ashita Mittal, Regional Representative for Central Asia of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime for Central Asia, based in Tashkent. She has been covering Central Asia and Southern Caucasus since 2014. She has over 35 years of development experience, especially in addressing counter-narcotics, prevention of transnational organized crime, including on smuggling of migrants and trafficking in persons, crime prevention, corruption, and counterterrorism, and prevention of violent extremism. She has been with the UN ODC since 1995. Ms. Mittal, we thank you for being with us. I give the floor to you to introduce our distinguished panel this morning. One more word of housekeeping: if there are colleagues who want to test their microphones from the panelists, there we are. We have Mr. Can I please ask to mute your microphone? Perfect. Ms. Mittal, you have the floor.
A very good morning and a very good afternoon from Central Asia. Thank you for inviting us to moderate today's Roundtable 3. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to welcome you to the second day of the regional review of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration in the UNECE region, and in particular to Roundtable 3, which focuses specifically on measures implemented by states and other stakeholders to protect migrants through right-based border governance measures and including policy measures that allow for direct screening and legal and humanitarian assistance, protecting persons at risk and enabling states to track migration trends comprehensively. This information would also be very helpful to the global compacts, knowledge platforms, and connection hubs. This event is taking place during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is highlighting the vulnerabilities and inequalities and exposing precisely the fragilities that are addressed in 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I believe that more than ever before, there is a need to recognize the indivisibility and the interconnectedness of Agenda for Sustainable Development, peace, rule of law, security, and human rights. The pandemic is having an unprecedented and devastating impact on the migration, human mobility, and displacement, both in terms of the regimes of borders and migration governance, and the situation of all people on the move. This has been exacerbated as many state borders are closed. Measures to be discussed may include border screening centers, awareness-raising initiatives, and whole of the government approaches to integrate border management along with other stages of migration continuum with health services. Under these circumstances, the protection of the most vulnerable people, including women and children, and victims of human trafficking and smuggled migrants, are of vital importance. The most recent figures from UNODC estimate smuggling of migrants generates annually $5 to $7 billion, with criminal networks looking to profit from the COVID-19 pandemic. It is critical for governments to work together in line with international norms and standards to combat human trafficking and cross-border crimes, at the same time to also make sure that we have actual safe migration of people who look to go out. UNODC, with its key global expertise and the mandates on advancing the rule of law and supporting the efforts to counter migrant smuggling and trafficking in person, supports the member states in the UNECE region to the timely provision of policy guidance on migration issues, particularly on countering associated manifestations of organized crime, including by tailoring response to COVID-19 related concerns. UNODC is ready to support member states in the UNECE region in the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration. Applying and reinforcing this international framework of commitments to counter human trafficking, smuggling of migrants, and on safe mobility requires improved international coordination and cooperation among states. As we heard from yesterday's recap, this has been reinforced by all of the stakeholders who are present in this global consortium and compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. For this reason, UNODC, as permanent coordinator of the Interagency Coordination Group Against Trafficking in Persons, ICAT, is pleased to be part of the Executive Committee of the UN Migration Network and remains strongly committed to continue its active engagement in the work of the network in the region. I believe, ladies and gentlemen, during this roundtable, we'll be able to discuss multi-sectoral issues in promoting safe, orderly, and regular migration, as well as countering trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants from national, international, rights-based perspectives. I firmly believe that there cannot be any sustainable development without adherence to rule of law, and there can be no rule of law without due diligence to human rights. And that's the principles on which we need to be working together. With regard to GCM Objective 4, this roundtable will seek to discuss means by which states and stakeholders fulfill the right of migrants to a legal identity. This includes the provision of proof of nationality and relevant documentation and accurately ascertaining the legal status upon entry, during the stay, and on return. It is recognized within the GCM guiding principles that the whole of government, whole of society response is required to mitigate these vulnerabilities and implement support and protection services. This relates closely to GCM Objective 9, which considers regional and transnational responses to the smuggling of migrants. GCM Objective 10 relates to eradication of trafficking in persons, and the roundtable will allow participants to share information on initiatives, especially involving regional cooperation, to raise awareness of these crimes, identify and support victims, and convict perpetrators of these crimes. Further, this roundtable will speak to the GCM Objective 21 regarding cooperation to facilitate safe, dignified return, ensuring that nationals are duly received and readmitted, and ensuring sustainable reintegration, regional cooperation, assistance for safe and dignified return and reintegration is therefore critical to be considered during this roundtable. This roundtable will discuss the global impact, especially in the response to COVID-19. I am honored and privileged to have with me today a set of very distinguished panelists. We have with us Mr. Julian Khadaj, who is a Deputy Minister of Interior's Republic of Albania. We have with us Mr. Felipe Gonzalez Morales, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of Migrants, and Ms. Afshan Khan, Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia, UNICEF. Let me also inform you that the panelists and those wishing to speak from the floor are kindly requested to adhere to the specific objectives covered by this roundtable. We have to also be sure that we look at more effective time management, and therefore in this context, before I invite the panelists are given 10 minutes for the interventions. I request you to please stick to the time limits. Participants that wish to respond to panelists may indicate this via the chat box, and this we will moderate immediately after the panelists have spoken. Panelists are requested to click blue request to speak buttons to be given access to the floor. Panelists will remain on the panels as speakers. When not speaking, please mute your microphone so that we don't have any kind of vibrance, any echo coming out. But let me, with this, have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Julian Khadaj, who will be the first panelist for this round table 3. Mr. Julian Khadaj has been the Deputy Minister of Interiors since October 9, 2017. And previously, he worked as a legal advisor to the OSCE presence in Albania. He was a legal advisor in the process of administrative territorial reforms in 2050. He has also served as a director of the Directorate of Foreign Relations and Public Relations at the Ministry of Justice. With this, may I invite Mr. Khadaj, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nital. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Good morning and good afternoon to you all. It's really a pleasure being here. First of all, I wish that all of you and your family members are in good health in this difficult period that we are all experiencing. Albania approved the GCM during the Intergovernmental Conference in Marrakesh on 10 and 11 December 2018, and it's really committed in implementing its objectives. Also because of the various migration dynamics that our country has previously faced and is currently facing. I'm not saying anything new, that when it comes to migration, it's not an issue that a single state can tackle. It needs a global effort, and this is why these kind of initiatives are more than welcome. And we are trying to make the best use of them as a country. I would like to take this opportunity also to commend the work of the IOM in Albania, which is our main partner in the governance and management of the migration issues in the country. And I would like to commend their help, especially also the latest is that their support in the approval of the National Strategy on Migration to 2019-2022 and its action plan, which includes concrete actions which contribute to achieve this major goal. The development of this strategy is a very important moment for Albania now, and contributes in addressing a sort of gap, because the previous strategy was dated like 2010. The National Strategy of Migration, which has been approved in 2019, focuses on 4 strategic priorities, which is ensuring strategic governance of migration in Albania, ensure safe and orderly migration from, through, and to Albania, develop an effective labor migration policy while enhancing the positive impact of migration on the social and economic life of the country, and promote and protect migrants' rights and their integration in society. The Ministry of Interior is the main government institution in charge of the migration policy, and we have made numerous efforts, not only from the relevant stakeholders about the objectives of the GCM, but also to try to implement them and to have them working basically in practice. Migration management issues, I believe, are very important for the development of our country, and it's also an obligation arising from the process that Albania is going through the integration into the European Union. For many years, our country has been affected by several migration dynamics, and when you speak about Albania, you speak about also about migrants from Albania to the EU countries, and also migrants from the third countries coming to Albania. In this when it comes to migrants from Albania going to the EU countries, we have done some studies, because one of the problems arising lately from 2015 was requests of Albanian citizens for asylum in EU countries. What we have done some studies and done some checks, and what results to us is that this is being used as an instrument to circumvent migration restriction policies in the EU countries. And we see that when EU countries concede residence permits, the requests for asylum are really low. At the moment, the EU countries have some restriction on migration policies. I'm speaking always about Albanian citizens at the moment. We see that these requests from asylum arise. This is clearly an instrument to avoid migration restriction policies, and we saw it clearly in 2016 when Germany resolved this kind of problem by classifying Albania as a safe country, as a third safe country. And the request for asylum in that case dropped significantly. On the other hand, we have the problem of Albania being used as a path from the third countries migrants to go through Europe. And we are experiencing this at the south border of Greece, where we have this year we have a significant increase in the numbers of people trying to cross through Albania and to reach the EU countries. As of now, you have also the report we submitted voluntarily, but as of now we have almost like 17,000 migrants coming from the border with Greece, meaning in the south of Albania, which is almost the double of the same of the cases of the last year. So, and it's an important increase also through the dynamics that these conflicts happening in the world, and also cases from the North Africa. Albania, we try to make up with this, and we try to do our best to address this issue. Besides Albanian police forces being deployed in the south in order to better management the border, we also are the first country, and I'm proud to say this, we are the first country in the Southeast Balkans to have signed an agreement with Frontex, the European agency which is responsible for this kind of phenomenon. From 2019, from May 2019, people from Frontex are patrolling together with Albanian police in the south border, and to be honest, we have learned a lot from their experience, and also trying to benefit from their presence in Albania. The Ministry of Interior in particular has made numerous efforts to increase the capacity for migrant registration and temporary accommodation by improving conditions in the existing reception centers and by creating new ones. As of now, along with the traditional open center and the closed center, we have also created some temporary centers in the south of Albania, also with the help of the IOM, to improve our capacities in hosting the migrants. We have approved amendments, important amendments to the law on foreigners in order to guarantee a more clear procedure for those requesting to enter Albania. And we have also, the parliament has now recently approved the new law on asylum, which provides for a better cooperation between state institutions, for clear responsibilities, for a new procedure for requesting asylum according to the due process of law criteria, and trying to and helping to avoid some problems we experienced in the past when it comes to interviewing, especially in the rare languages, by introducing online interpretation and undertaking a lot of other measures in order to trying to face the problem. Albania is a pathway together with Macedonia, I think, North Macedonia, and I think we'll have to deal with the problem for a long time. It's not a thing that will be solved within a year or two, but it's a process that will continue in time. As far as we have numerous conflicts in the Middle East, and also lots of migrants coming from North Africa trying to exploit this route. One point that I would like to say and to mention here in this roundtable is readmission agreements. Albania has readmission agreements with many European countries and with the EU Commission itself. What we are missing right now, and any kind of help or lobbying is more than welcome, is readmission with countries of the Middle East, like Syria, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, or with countries of Northern Africa, Morocco in special. I would like to conclude here by saying that Albania will continue to contribute to the full realization of the objectives of the GCM in order to successfully meet the future of the global and regional challenges, aiming at a legal control and a safe migration. And of course, I'm open to any kind of discussion during this very interesting roundtable. I thank you very much for the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Khadaj, for an excellent presentation and giving us insight on the many steps that have been taken by Albania, including my compliments to you for the national strategy that has been developed in partnership with IOM on safe migration. We see that Albania is both a source, a transit, and a destination country, and therefore you have the experience of managing this effectively through the steps that the government is taking. We also understand that you are requesting us, the countries, to come forward and to look at the readmission processes so that this can, especially with countries where you don't have the agreements, and that is something for consideration of those member states who are willing to do that with you. But I think one of the lessons learned from your statement is that when you have clearly outlined procedures and processes, it helps to reduce the impact and the kind of discomfort that people are looking for safe migration, which I think is a good lesson to take from your statement. And with this, let me now have the pleasure of inviting our next speaker, our panelist, who needs no introduction, but he is Mr. Philip Gonzalez Morales. He is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants. He is a former president of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, where he was also a commissioner and rapporteur on migrants and refugees between 2008 and 2015. Professor of International Law at University of Diego Portales in Santiago, Chile, where he also directs a master's in international human rights law. Honorific professor at University of Carlos III of Madrid, as well as at which he teaches international human rights law at series of postgraduate programs since 2003. Over to you, Mr. Morales.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon. The distinguished delegates from states, representatives from UN agencies, national human rights institutions, civil society, municipalities, trade unions, private sector, and other stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very glad to participate at this first regional review of the Global Compact on Migration, which will be followed by similar reviews around the world. I expect to be able to participate at all regional reviews as my mandate has a universal scope. The Global Compact on Migration is a landmark initiative in the development of a multilateral approach to migration. Migration cannot be addressed by each country in isolation, but requires instead a collaborative approach by states, UN agencies, the civil society, and other stakeholders. The adoption of the Global Compact on Migration was indeed the outcome of such collaborative work. The Global Compact sets out a roadmap to strengthen migration policies through a series of practical measures. It provides a wide range of alternatives to enhance migration policies. Addressing its implementation at the regional level will contribute to compare experiences among countries, to learn from each other's experiences, and to enhance regional actions in regard of migration policies and measures. Regional dynamics is crucial for achieving the Global Compact objectives. As part of the tasks of my mandate, I actively participated throughout the process of preparation of the Global Compact and have been working since its adoption to contribute to its effectiveness through different means of implementation. I do so with a human rights-based, gender perspective understanding of the Compact. For this purpose, I participate at the UN Network on Migration, including as a member of the Steering Committee of the Startup Fund for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, which plays an important task in the implementation of the Compact. I also make use of the Compact in communications with states, thematic reports, country reports, as well as through other means. In many meetings with organizations from the civil society since the adoption of the Compact, I have been asked about my assessment on its level of implementation so far. To be sure, the ambitious initiative, which is the Global Compact on Migration, requires many efforts to put it in movement and make it effective. The COVID-19 pandemic has put an additional serious obstacle to move forward expeditiously in this regard. However, almost 2 years have passed since the Compact adoption, so it is time to ensure that its implementation moves forward in a decisive manner. In my capacity as Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants, I have been working on a number of issues related to the Global Compact for Migration objectives subject to the discussion of this roundtable. I would like in particular to stress the following ones. Collective responsibility to save lives of migrants in distress at sea. This implies an active role of states. It also requires the adoption of measures to ensure protection of humanitarian initiatives oriented to this purpose and not criminalizing them. In my recent report to the Human Rights Council about the right to a freedom of association of migrants and the defenders, I emphasized the legitimacy of humanitarian actions in this regard and the state's obligation to guarantee the human rights of those who undertake such actions. Coordinated EU external border management that ensures security of migrants. This should be at all times consistent with human rights protection and standards, including the protection of the right to life, the right to physical integrity, and the non-refoulement principle, among others. Strengthen regional response to smuggling of migrants, eradicating trafficking in person, and enhanced protection of migrant victims of trafficking. These responses should make sure that they do not criminalize as smugglers or traffickers those who save the lives of migrants and asylum seekers for humanitarian concerns, nor they should criminalize the migrants or asylum seekers themselves. Safe and dignified return and readmission, which guarantees due process, individual assessment, and uphold the prevention of collective expulsions. In relation to these issues, my mandate has received information of a number of practices in the region in violation of international standards. A list of the most relevant of them should include the following: pushbacks, including violent ones, forced returns outside official procedures, lack of individual assessments which impair the right to seek asylum, and collective expulsions on land and at sea. Since I took office 3 years ago, I have transmitted, often jointly with our special procedure mandate holders, a number of letters and urgent actions to concerned member states in this regard. I have also addressed these issues in country reports and at thematic reports. While recognizing challenges encountered by all countries in the world in responding to the current public health crisis, I wish to emphasize that migrants are among those in the most vulnerable situations. I am particularly concerned about the reduced capacity to save lives at sea, the suspension of access to asylum procedure, and the lack of appropriate COVID-19 preventive measures at immigration detention facilities during the pandemic. I would like to refer member states to the joint guidance note on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the human rights of migrants, prepared jointly by my mandate and the Committee on Migrant Workers, issued last May, which contains recommendations of the two mechanisms that I would like to share with member states. I wish to highlight our recommendations in regard to the objectives addressed at this cluster. They request to conduct processes of regularization of migrants so as they get documentation, to suspend forced returns during the pandemic, to reduce the number of adult individuals at immigration detention to the lowest possible level during the pandemic, and to prohibit immigration detention of children. Any feedback from your region is most welcome. Migrant children continue to be detained in the region. Some are separated from their families in a number of countries in the region. I have participated at a series of webinars and meetings at which it has been shown that immigration detention of children is pervasive in some countries of this region. The deprivation of liberty of adults in the context of migration must be applied as an exceptional measure of last resort. In the Global Compact for Migration Objective 13, states are committed to prioritize non-custodial alternatives to detention that are in line with international law. Deprivation of liberty should indeed be a measure of last resort applicable to all persons. In the case of migratory detention, this should be applied even more exceptionally, as irregular migration cannot be considered a crime under international law. Migratory detention should not be used as a deterrence measure. To this end, I also wish to stress that distinction should be made between adult migrants and migrant children. Migrant children should be considered as children first and foremost. I highlighted in my recent report to the General Assembly that the detention of any child for reasons related to their parents, or their legal guardian's migration status is never in the best interests of the child, and is always a child rights violation under international human rights law. The deprivation of liberty of migrant child should be prohibited, and the detention of children whose parents are detained should not be justified on the basis of maintaining the family unit. Many migration policies in the countries participated at this regional review have mostly a security focus. While security is a legitimate concern, it cannot override the human rights of migrants. In fact, there are human rights that cannot be restricted on the basis of security, such as the right to life, to physical and psychical integrity, and others. The Global Compact for Migration explicitly states that it is based on the existing international human rights instruments. This means that the adequate approach to the compact is a human rights-based one. I look forward to the interactive discussion and hearing from member states on their plans to address these issues and achieve the respective Global Compact objectives, and also from other stakeholders. The Compact provides us a unique opportunity to move forward on migration policies on a cooperative basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Morales, for placing the due emphasis that is very much important in the context of safe migration, in emphasizing the due human rights that need to be observed, while making sure that we give emphasis to security, but not compromise the rights of people, including children. And looking at children first, let me now invite our next speaker, Ms. Afshan Khan, who again does not require any introduction. She is the UNICEF Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia, and the Special Coordinator for Refuge and Migrant Response in Europe. Previously, she was the Director of Emergency Programs for UNICEF, Director of Public Sector Alliances and Resource Mobilization, Associate Regional Director for Eastern and Southern Africa, and a UNICEF representative in Jamaica. Ms. Khan has also worked with the Interagency Standing Committee for Humanitarian Affairs in Geneva and the Executive Office of the Secretary General, the United Nations Development Group. From 2012 to 2014, Ms. Khan was the CEO of Women for Women International, where she was responsible for setting the strategic vision and mobilizing the necessary resources for women rebuilding their lives after war. She has a master's degree in public policy from Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies and a bachelor's degree in political sciences from McGill University. Over to you, Ms. Khan.
Thank you very much, Aisha Mittal. Excellencies, distinguished partners and colleagues, it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for inviting UNICEF to participate in the first ever regional review of the Global Compact for Migration. The Compact represents a breakthrough for children and states alike. For the first time, an agreed document recognizes that children and young people are central to migration management. It provides governments with a practical tool better to meet their existing obligations to protect, include, and empower all children, regardless of status. The Compact is child-sensitive across all 23 objectives, so that laws, policies, and practices are made effective for children. Because when children fall through the cracks, migration systems fail. The Compact is rooted in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It calls on states to treat every migrant child as a child first. In other words, focus on inclusion, on the potential, and on the opportunity children and young people represent. Through support such as psychosocial counseling, access to healthcare services, and education, migrant children can overcome traumatic experiences and become full, productive members of their societies. At UNICEF, we work to keep this promise every day. But even the best framework is only as strong as its implementation. Today, we have the opportunity to reflect on how the Global Compact on Migration is brought to life every day by governments, civil society, organizations, and especially children and youth themselves. What does successful implementation of the Compact look like in practical terms for children in Europe? The Compact's proposition is that protecting children makes managing migration more efficient and more predictable. This is the most important area where rights are most at risk and needs are most acute. For example, upon arrival at a country's borders and before being removed from a state's territory. Again and again, we see that migration management models that work for both children and states focus on engagement, not on deterrence, on care, not on detention, and there are no shortage of promising practices and examples in this region that showcase the Global Migration Compact vision and commitments. Ireland's equity of care principle, for example, guarantees equal care to national and non-national children. Germany's inclusive national youth welfare system offers the same standards of protection and support to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children as to national children. And Greece has dramatically expanded its guardianship scheme and system, achieved education inclusion, and expanded opportunities for independent living to ensure unaccompanied children and adolescents get the care they need and do not end up in detention facilities. Models such as these build bridges between migration management and child protection authorities within and across countries. It is important that we focus on what works already and build a European-wide reception and asylum system for and with children. Excellencies, this regional review meeting comes at a pivotal moment for many governments present here today, as members of the European Union discuss the new EU Migration Pact and on migration and asylum. As many partners have highlighted, at the stakeholder consultation on Monday and in yesterday's session, this is an important opportunity we cannot miss to further align EU law and policy with the commitments for children in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, commitments that are now also reflected in the Global Compact on Migration. This is also an opportunity to address systemic weaknesses that may put migrant children's lives at risk for far too long. such as designing pre-screening processes and reception systems that protect children based on vulnerability, not on age, investing in adequate reception and care to protect any child who enters the EU. This requires a system with financial and human resources, facilities that have high standards, service delivery and referral capacity that can cater to a range of individual needs. Supporting migrant children to reintegrate in countries of return through case management, psychosocial support, and monitoring. In his latest report, Mr. Felipe Gonzalez Morales, the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants and our fellow panelist, clearly articulated and said in his speech today that immigration detention is never in a child's best interest, not even as a last resort. The evidence is clear. Detention, even for a short period of time, and even in what are sometimes termed nice facilities, can have devastating effects on a child's mental health and well-being. Detention creates scars that last for life. Many member states, especially in this region, have been at the forefront of an emerging global consensus to end the practice of child immigration detention. This consensus is well reflected in Objective 13 of the Compact. We must now make it a reality at the national level. This is why UNICEF, UNHCR, and the International Detention Coalition, as co-leads of the UN Migration Network Workstream on Alternatives to Detention, are convening governments in all regions next week to learn from each other on expanding the use of alternatives to immigration detention. Excellencies, before I conclude, let me just add that COVID-19 has widened existing gaps for many, including migrant children, that certain migration practices, immigration detention, pushbacks, denying health care to undocumented migrants are both untenable and unsafe. As the Secretary General has said, inclusion protects, while exclusion puts us all at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Afshan Khan. Thank you very much. I totally agree with you when you said that immigration detention is never in the interest of any child. And it is really true that children are most vulnerable and also their needs are immense. And when you have pushbacks, they also become increasingly more vulnerable. We have seen the theme that occurs, and I think all of the speakers have highlighted the issue of a balanced approach between looking at protecting the rights of the migrants and to look at safe and orderly mobility. But this is also a time for us to reflect that there are many good practices, as was highlighted from Ireland, from Germany, as well as from Greece, that are actually positive experiences. And also when we heard from Albania on the balanced approach that they're trying to adopt. So we have good practices emerging from the region, but now it's a time for us to also hear from the floor. And at this point of time, I would like to invite our friend Julian Khadaj to also help us identify the speakers. I have with me about 7 or 8 speakers. And one of the first speakers from the floor is from the government of Armenia, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Armenia. May I request support in inviting the speaker from the floor?
Thank you, Ms. Mittal. Thank you very much. I will call on the speakers list now. As you said, we have about 8 or 9 speakers who requested the floor. We have, first, we will hear from a couple of governments, and then stakeholders. The list is as follows. As you said, we have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Armenia requested the floor, then Minister of Foreign Affairs Azerbaijan, followed by Canada, and then Terre des Hommes, Pierre Cazenave, followed by UNHCR. These are the first 4 speakers. if you want to speak, please press the request to speak button so I can put you on the floor to speak. If you allow me, the panelists, I will have to let some of you go, so to make space for the interventions. In the end, I will give back the panel to Ms. Mittal for question, comments, and closing remarks. So can I please call on Armenia?
Hello, Julian.
Yes,
hello.
Elisa.
There is Armenia will be speaking under roundtable 4. So we'll proceed with the list of the speakers
Thank you, Elisa. Well understood. So we'll go next in the speakers list. So I'm pleased to give the floor to the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan. Can you please press the request to speak button? You have the floor, sir. You please unmute your microphone and switch on your camera. You're now on the floor, sir. We can see you on the floor. If you unmute your microphone and turn on your camera.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you well and see you well, sir.
Great. Mr. Moderator, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking the International Organization for Migration and UNECE for convening the first regional review of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. Azerbaijan took active part in the preparatory process of this milestone document and supported its adoption by the UN General Assembly 2 years ago. We are faithful to our commitments under the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants of 2016, as well as the GCM. As reflected in our recent report submitted to the UNECE Secretariat, we spare no effort to fulfill our undertakings. To save time, I will mention just 2 main achievements of Azerbaijan in the implementation of the GCM objectives. One is development of national strategy on migration of the Republic of Azerbaijan for the years of 2020 to 2025. This is a comprehensive draft strategy covering relevant aspects of migration governance. It upholds existing international legal and policy frameworks, particularly GCM and SDGs. Another important initiative towards fulfilling our commitments within the GCM is establishment of the United Nations Network on Migration in Azerbaijan in July 2020. The support of the IOM has been crucial in all our achievements, and I express our profound gratitude for this. The GCM was adopted not so long ago, but we are already facing a new scale and dynamics of migration and human mobility. Mobility and migration, along with health and economy, are the worst hit areas by the COVID-19 pandemic and restrictive measures taken by the states in this regard. In order to revitalize safe, orderly, and irregular migration as a major catalyst of economic development in the world, we need to demonstrate solidarity among ourselves and with relevant international organizations in fighting the pandemic, supporting migrants and host societies to overcome its consequences and uprooting illegal migration. Since the first days of the pandemic, Azerbaijan took proactive steps domestically. We also came up with new global proposals. Upon initiative of the President of Azerbaijan, the summit-level meetings of the organizations currently chaired by Azerbaijan, were held. Furthermore, upon initiative of President Aliyev, a special session of the UN General Assembly in response to the COVID-19 pandemic will be convened on 3-4 December 2020. I take this opportunity to encourage the countries to participate in this session and contribute to its discussions. In supporting migrants and host societies to overcome consequences of the pandemic during these challenging times, the role of the IOM has become increasingly crucial as a leading international agency on migration. We highly appreciate the regional project for the South Caucasus, aimed at promoting migrant-inclusive response to COVID-19, assisting stranded and vulnerable migrants in the region. Azerbaijan currently works on several projects in line with the GCM, with the support and contribution of the IOM and its development fund. One project jointly elaborated by the IOM and the State Migration Service of Azerbaijan will facilitate the establishment of the Regional Training Center on Migration. Ladies and gentlemen, true solidarity of all states is a key to fulfillment of the commonly agreed set of tasks within the GCM. It is unfortunate to still witness promotion of illegal migration by some countries for political purposes. To our deep regret, our region is not exempt of this phenomenon either, mainly due to aggressive policy pursued by Armenia against Azerbaijan. Starting from 1988, it expelled ethnic Azerbaijanis living in Armenia. Almost 300,000 Azerbaijanis had to flee Armenia and became refugees. Then, in early 1990s, Armenia used military force to invade Azerbaijan and occupy a large part of Azerbaijan's internationally recognized territories, including the Nagorno-Karabakh region and 7 adjacent regions of Azerbaijan. These lands were ethnically cleansed. As a result, around 700,000 Azerbaijanis became IDPs. After the ceasefire was reached back in 1994, Armenia started to resettle ethnic Armenians from different parts of the world in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. Despite numerous calls on Armenia to halt its policy of aggression against Azerbaijan, in recent years, it has actually intensified its unlawful actions, including illegal resettlement policy, particularly bringing Armenians from the Middle East to the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. To do that, Armenia abused the situation in the Middle East, including even the catastrophic explosion in the port of Beirut in August this year. After the latest Armenian provocations, when on 27 September the Armenian armed forces started shelling the civilian settlements, Azerbaijan was obliged to undertake countermeasures to protect its civilian population and restore its territorial integrity. During the hostilities, Armenia, in blatant violation of the international humanitarian law, brought in mercenaries and terrorists to the territories of Azerbaijan and used them in combat. All these acts by Armenia constitute not only a grave violation of international humanitarian law, but also a manifest disregard by Armenia to the commitments under the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants of 2016 and the GCM. On November 10, Armenia accepted ceasefire and obliged to withdraw its armed forces from the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. This finally enables Azerbaijani IDPs to return to their homes in safety and with dignity, and thus achieve durable solution for them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Next on the speakers list, I'd like to give the floor to Canada. Donald Cochrane from the Permanent Mission in Geneva. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I would like to begin by once again thanking the UN Network on Migration and the UN Economic Commission for Europe for convening this important event to reflect upon the implementation of the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. Thank you also to all those participating for sharing their inspiring and thought-provoking experiences and examples of the GCM in practice. On this second day of the review, I am pleased to share some insights into Canada's role as a champion country for the Global Compact for Migration's implementation. Specifically, in relation to the theme of today's roundtable, I would like to highlight the importance of promoting a gender-responsive approach to migration management. Gender-responsive migration management is a guiding principle of the GCM that cuts across all objectives of the Compact and notably applies to the migrant protection. From Canada's perspective, it is key to recognizing that women, girls, and marginalized groups experience migration differently than men and boys. In recognizing this, we can more clearly identify particular vulnerabilities some migrants may face due to their gender and other intersecting factors, and act to ensure their human rights are respected and their voices heard throughout the migration process. This is especially important in the context of COVID-19, which is exacerbating already existing vulnerabilities. Gender-responsive migration management also means recognizing women and girls as active agents of change, who are often called on to demonstrate incredible resilience and resourcefulness throughout the migration process. It is crucial that we include migrant women and girls in decision-making in order to effectively address their needs and priorities. Canada's feminist foreign policy and feminist international assistance policy focus on actions that are feminist, human rights-based, inclusive, and intersectional, considering the needs of the most vulnerable and marginalized, and contributing to global efforts to leave no one behind. Complementing its suite of international feminist policies, the Government of Canada requires all federal government departments to apply a gender-based analysis plus lens when developing policies, programs, and legislation. This analysis provides federal officials with the means to attain better results by ensuring that policy changes are inclusive of diverse perspectives and realities, including those of women and girls. To facilitate more rights-based border governance measures, for example, Canada has been focused on offering gender-responsive programming that advocates for the rights of migrants to be respected following border crossings when they might remain in situations of vulnerability, especially in the context of major cross-border influxes. A concrete example of how Canada's feminist policies are implemented on the ground can be found in Canada's support to anti-trafficking in persons efforts through its anti-crime capacity building program, which includes developing comprehensive approaches to address the social norms and gender inequalities that create the enabling conditions for trafficking in persons. For example, in collaboration with the International Bureau for Children's Rights, we are working to build the professional capacities of key actors involved in the prosecution, protection, and prevention of human trafficking of women and girls, among other marginalized groups in Honduras. The project's objective is to improve the Honduran authorities' institutional and community-level response to human trafficking. From Canada's perspective, the importance and necessity of applying a strong gender lens to all that we do is very clear. Without it, we risk designing migration policies and programs that do not achieve their goals because they neglect the differentiated needs of migrants. We look forward to hearing how others here at the review incorporate broader inclusion in their implementation of the Global Compact and invite those interested in exchanging experiences with Canada to do so. Once again, Canada would like to thank everyone who has made this review possible, especially under the challenging circumstances posed by COVID-19. We are thrilled to see the shared enthusiasm for the Compact and look forward to learning from the experiences of others throughout the remainder of the sessions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Canada for that statement. I know the next two speakers will be France, Ambassador for Migration Issues, Pascal Teixeira, followed by Greece. And then we'll start with stakeholders for the time being. Ambassador Teixeira, you have the floor.
Oui, bonjour. Merci beaucoup de me donner la parole.
Good morning, and thank you very much for giving me the floor. I hope everyone can hear me well. I would like to make a few remarks about some of the objectives that are on the agenda for this session. First, the objective 10, 11, and 21. I would like to remind everyone of the context, because we've talked a lot about the impact of COVID-19 on migration. Borders have been closed. There have been restrictions at the borders. These were measures that were applied for all populations of the European countries. All citizens have seen their freedom restricted in their countries themselves and across borders. We have observed that of regular entries, there were more and more regular influx on the Mediterranean borders. And in France, we have seen an increase of non-admission at borders. So at the same time, we have had less. We've had an increase of the number of migrants in regular situations, which is a problem at political level, as you can imagine. We have also observed, this will be my second remark, that networks of migrant smuggling and have developed, including criminal networks that will facilitate the entry of migrants, and in particular of minors. We have to apply the rules of our states. We need to take security issues into considerations, and I will recall the example of this Tunisian who killed 3 people in Nice and who managed to come in France while he had been forbidden to come in France. It is necessary to act in a coordinated way. We talk a lot about externalization by the European Union, but when we talk with transit countries in Northern Africa, they are faced with this problem. They are transit countries themselves. They also are destination countries, and they understand that it is very important to work against these criminal networks. I would like to remind everyone that France is engaged in many regional initiatives, like the Niamey initiative that is aimed at strengthening the different countries. We also work on joint partnerships with Western African countries in order to strengthen legal systems and police in these countries. And we also launched several initiatives with European countries and Northern African countries to fight against these trafficking networks. We also have to talk about rescuing people at sea. France calls for a sustainable solution. You know that we've had a temporary agreement with a few countries in La Valette in September in 2019. Which allowed voluntary relocalization of people who are eligible for international protection. France was one of the countries that relocalized these people. Amongst these people from Italy and Malta, France have taken a number of them, but we'd like to have a sustainable system. The compact from the Commission makes very useful recommendations on this regard, and we would like these recommendations to be applied in order to have a right balance between solidarity and fairness. And I would like to talk about Objective 4 and to say that there is a link that we would like to develop, and a nexus between the need to have documented migrants and the strengthening of different status when titles are not when identity documents are not fair. It's not possible to have equality of treatment because there is uncertainty about the documents and about justifications. So we have to work on these issues. All countries of origin are also working on these issues. And France is trying to fight against illicit documents and the strengthening of civil status, because civil status is a tool to access rights, in particular in the context of this COVID crisis. The right to identity is one of the first rights. It gives access to health, education, political rights, participation to elections. So this is also a way to sensitize, to help strengthen the migration systems, and would like to pay a lot of attention to this issue in the future. I would like to thank you for your attention.
I now give the floor to Greece. Michail Kosmidis, Head of Migration Policy, Department of Ministry for Migration and Asylum.
Thank you very much. Good morning from Athens. Greece, as an EU member state at the external borders of the Union, is confronted with multiple challenges and increased responsibilities in the area of migration. In recent years, our country has been received large numbers of irregular migrants attempting to enter the EU and asylum seekers in search of protection. It also hosts 650,000 legally residing migrants who have settled in the country with their families through successive immigration flows already since the beginning of the 1990s. Based on this experience, we are convinced that international and regional cooperation is crucial in order to effectively manage international migration. We therefore appreciate the Global Compact of Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration as a major political framework of international protection that reflects our common will to address the migration phenomenon in all its dimensions and as a common geopolitical challenge. At national level, working towards the fulfillment of the objectives of the GSM is obviously a dynamic, long-term process. Without losing sight of the strong interdependence between the 23 objectives of the Global Compact, we place special emphasis to those objectives that are most relevant to the urgent challenges that we are confronted with. In this respect, Objectives 9, 10, 11, and 21 are of major importance to Greece. Indeed, we prioritize the protection and the effective management of our national borders, which are also European borders, in line with our obligations under national and EU law and in full respect for human rights. In this respect, Greece pays a great attention to efficient and durable cooperation with our northern neighbors in view of a holistic and effective border management policy. Furthermore, we focus on combating smugglers and traffickers networks, which are criminal activities posing a threat to migrants themselves. We have submitted concrete proposals to this direction to our European counterparts, but wish to underline that cooperation of all countries involved, origin, transit, and destination, is critical in these efforts. This kind of cooperation is necessary also for efficiently implementing the return and readmission policy, which we see as an indispensable component in a system of coherent migration management. It is also important to highlight that Greece attaches particular attention and a special emphasis on protecting vulnerable migrants, and in particular children, in the migration process. A number of actions are ongoing on the ground, and the Special Secretary of Unaccompanied Minors has been established within the Ministry of Migration and Asylum to coordinate relevant actions. In addition, a program for the relocation of unaccompanied minors to a number of other EU member states with the cooperation of those member states, European Commission and EASO, as well as UNHCR and IOM, is being implemented, and this despite the pandemic. With regards to legal migrations system in Greece, we have developed over the years a solid legislative framework for regular migration, fully harmonized with the relevant EU acquis. In this context, we focus on ensuring the availability of options and pathways for regular migration, including through bilateral agreements on labor migration, in line with national labor market needs and capacities. Finally, we currently also focus on safeguarding migrants' legal status of residence and facilitating procedures and access to services by them, in light also of the current challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Greece for this statement. Next in the speakers list are Terre des Hommes, Pierre Cazenave, followed by UNHCR, and I have Nicolas Bras on the list. Pierre Cazenave, the floor is yours. You're now on the panel. If you unmute your mic and turn on your camera.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you and see you well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to take the floor. I'm speaking on behalf of Terre des Hommes, who is also a member and the co-chair of the Initiative for Child Rights in the Global Compact. A more specific address may be made by the initiative by forthcoming speakers. So Your Excellencies and dear colleagues, as noted earlier today and yesterday by virtually all distinguished speakers, the Global Compacts for safe, orderly and regular migration is a historical achievement and of major importance to ensure that the international migration management frameworks are respectful of migrants' rights and aligned with international human and children's rights framework. The regional review is a key milestone in ensuring that the collective commitments that states made in Marrakesh are translated into practice. Unfortunately, we believe, as Terre des Hommes, that recent developments in the region are not necessarily suggesting that this is likely to happen at either national or regional level, particularly in relation to Objective 21. And I will focus my intervention on that. The GCM commits in its Objective 21 to promoting child-sensitive return and reintegration programs and highlights the need to ensure that appropriate reception, care and reintegration arrangements for children are in place in the country of origin upon return. But for many children, return means going to a country where they have never resided, of which they have no memory. They may have no strong social ties there and often struggle to establish or re-establish positive relationships with their relatives, their peers, or the members of their community, especially when they have spent a long time away. They may not speak the language or share the culture of their country of origin, and they do face a wide array of challenges in accessing basic services, including health, housing, and education. And sometimes they face discrimination and stigma as returnees, let alone in this period of pandemic. At national and local levels, very few governments have actually adopted comprehensive policies or allocated budgets specifically aiming to support returning children and youth. Funding for reintegration programming tends to be focused on adults and on economic needs, despite evidence of the deep social and psychosocial needs of child returnees. Returnee children have rarely been adequately engaged in individual needs assessments and reintegration planning, and child protection actors rarely engage in cross-border collaboration and planning prior to a child's return. So often, returnee children are not able to access local and national child protection systems and child and family support services, as well as other services that they particularly need for their social inclusion, including psychosocial support, support with cultural adaptation, language teaching, etc., etc. So returnees are not systematically known to the authorities, and there is little data that exists on the number of returnees coming back to each local area. And they are not disaggregated by age group in general. So we think it's very important to ensure that individual reintegration plans are developed and that coordination mechanisms for cross-border collaboration between child protection actors in countries of origin, transit, and destination are in place prior to return. This way, states can ensure that there is a continuum of care and protection for each child. States should also ensure that returnee children can access inclusive local and national child protection systems on arrival, and that the response involves a diversified range of resources and coordinated multi-sectoral interventions focused on a successful reintegration process for children and their families. Today, EU member states, notably as part of the European Pact on Migration and Asylum, but also other European countries, should prioritize children and better address reintegration issues in their national policies or as part of regional policies, such as the one proposed by the Pact, and make sure that these include support for protection systems in Europe, but also in countries of origin, ensuring that reintegration processes are understood as a responsibility of both countries of origin and destination. In this way, a lot of work has been made, for example, just to mention it, by the government of Albania, with whom we work, and successful and promising practices are being implemented as we speak with the support of the GIZ. And as such, good practices and an example like that should be basis upon which governments could learn and integrate in future policies the reintegration reality that children face on a daily basis in their country of origin after return. Thank you all very much for your attention.
I thank Pierre Kazuna for that statement. Next on my speakers list, I have United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nicolas Bras. Can you please press the request to speak button? There you are. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Julian. And just to a correction, I'm from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, not human rights. Dear coordinator of the Network on Migration, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees would like to thank the Director General of IOM and the Secretariat of the Global UN Network on Migration for organizing this first regional review of the Global Compact on Migration in Europe, together with the Regional UN Network for Migration in Europe, which is embedded in the issue-based coalition on large movement of population, displacement, and resilience, co-chaired by UNHCR. UNHCR, as one of the co-chairs of this issue-based coalition, respecting the guiding principles of the Global Compact on Migration and considering our specific mandate, welcomes and stands ready to support actions to assist member states in implementing the Global Compact on Migration at the country and regional levels in alignment with the UN development system and in close liaison with the Global Network Secretariat. UNHCR is mandated to protect refugees and other forcibly displaced persons, as well as to find durable solutions for them, including safe, dignified, and voluntary return. UNHCR supports strengthened responses to migration, respect for the human rights of all on the move, while also recognizing that addressing challenges related to irregular migration can contribute to maintaining protection space for refugees, asylum seekers, and other forcibly displaced persons. In this spirit, we would like to highlight a few considerations regarding some of the issues discussed in the context of this roundtable. First of all, with regard to Objective 21, which pertains to the cooperation to facilitate safe and dignified return, as well as sustainable reintegration, states agreed to ensure that the nationals are duly received and readmitted, in full respect for the human right to return to one's own country and the obligation of states to readmit their own nationals. The safe, dignified, and sustainable return to their countries of origin of persons found not to be in need of international protection is an essential part of safeguarding the integrity of asylum systems and maintaining public support for refugee protection, as well as for regular migration. This becomes all the more important in the context of mixed refugee and migrant movements to Europe, where about 35% of people are found to be in need of international protection, while only 1/3 of those whose asylum claims are rejected eventually return. We are noting that several states have underlined some of the challenges they face in this regard in their submissions to this regional review. The Global Compact on Migration outlines a number of concrete actions to achieve Objective 21. Along with other UN partners, UNHCR stands ready, consistent with its mandate, to contribute to efforts in this area, including through contributing to collection of relevant data and analysis to inform action and policies, facilitating or participating in dialogue with concerned countries, including where relevant in international or regional fora, and potentially to assist where relevant on a good offices basis. Second, and last, with regards to the implementation of Objective 13, the use of migration detention only as a measure of last resort and work towards alternatives, UNHCR welcomes the efforts already undertaken by states to implement this objective, as reflected in several submissions to this regional review, in particular those touching upon alternatives to detention. UNHCR has a particular interest in this matter, including as a co-lead of the Network Working Group on Alternatives to Detention, which is actively supporting states in the implementation of Objective 13, as exemplified with the policy brief on alternatives to detention and the online peer learning exchange that will take place next week, as mentioned by Mrs. Khan in her panel intervention. In this area, UNHCR's 5-year global strategy beyond detention, which concluded at the end of 2019, has enabled us to undertake research and develop partnerships, tools, and training materials in close cooperation with states and regions across the world. We are making these available as sources of support, insights from peers, and good practice examples that can help states in considering and rolling out alternatives to detention. At the same time, we recognize that there are circumstances where detention needs to be used, including in the case of asylum seekers, for short periods of time and as a last resort. In this regard, UNHCR has also produced extensive practical guidance on legal and procedural safeguards, standards governing conditions, and other elements that can ensure respect for the rights of those potentially detained. Allow me to conclude in expressing UNHCR's sincere appreciation to IOM and to the UN Global Network Secretariat as a whole for the work undertaken so far at global and regional level. UNHCR is hopeful this review will serve as a model for reviews in other regions in early 2021, and you can rest assured of our commitment to support states in the implementation and review of the Global Compact on Migration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, of course, with apologies for that mistake earlier on. I now have the pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Iris Muth from the German Federal Ministry for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth. Ms. Muth, you are now on the floor. Please unmute your microphone and turn on your camera. Ms. Muth, can you please press the request to speak button again? Seems to be a technical issue. Once you are back, please press the request to speak button again. In the meantime, let's continue in the list of speakers. We have, as next speakers, we have Daniela Reale, Save the Children, and the Initiative on Child Rights in the Global Compacts, followed by Anousheh Farahat from the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg, followed by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, Lucia Bird. I now give the floor to Daniela Reale. It's also not there. I see Lucia Bird from the Global Initiative. I give you the floor. Can you please unmute your microphone and turn on your camera?
Good morning. And thank you to all speakers and, of course, for the opportunity to speak. I'm Lucia Bird of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime, a think tank based in Geneva which researches a range of organised crime types, including the smuggling of migrants and the trafficking of persons. I wish to reiterate that both due to the review of the Compact, but also due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are truly at a pivotal moment in crafting responses to irregular migration, human smuggling, and human trafficking. We are already tracking increases in irregular migration in a number of areas in the wake of the pandemic, which has destroyed livelihoods in many areas. And of course, there has been an investment in border control in many states, understandably, as irregular human movement has increasingly become associated with the spread of contagion. In line with this, there is evidence that anti-migrant sentiment has grown, and we know that when this occurs, the rights of migrants and refugees are often at risk. The panel has already mentioned a number of concerning practices, including pushbacks. The pandemic creates a risk of the erosion of frameworks that protect the human rights of migrants and refugees, including the commitments made in the context of the Compact. And rights lost in periods of emergency are hard to recover afterwards. Current evidence suggests that there is growing demand for human smugglers to facilitate irregular migration. And it's important to recognize that some counter-smuggling enforcement measures can drive riskier smuggling methods with severe consequences for the safety of migrants and refugees. And it's key to identify appropriate responses that adequately protect the human rights of migrants. And here I draw focus to Objective 9, which focuses on human smuggling, but also states that counter-smuggling measures should be in full respect for human rights. In the context of the pandemic, it's important that states and society at large do not backslide in the respect for the human rights of migrants and refugees, which is enshrined in such frameworks. Finally, it's key to remember that the UN Protocol on the Smuggling of Migrants is a criminal justice instrument intrinsically linked to the Convention on Transnational Organized Crime, and it is focused on the organized crime networks involved in the smuggling of migrants. As we see a growth in certain practices, including self-smuggling from a number of regions, including North Africa towards Europe, it is key to bear this in mind to ensure that this instrument is wielded appropriately and does not further damage the human rights of those on the move. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your statement. Can I ask Daniela Reale again to try to speak, please, followed then by Pablo Rojas from the OSCE.
Thank you. Can I just check that you can hear me and see me?
I can hear you well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I am Daniela Reale. Thank you very much for inviting us and speaking on behalf of Save the Children, but also on behalf of the Initiative for Child Rights in the Global Compact, which is a multi-stakeholder partnership that brings together over 30 civil society, trade unions, UN, and other organizations that work towards the shared agenda, which is to create a continuum of care, protection, and support for migrant children. The Global Compact represents obviously a milestone in the history of the global dialogue of international migration, as has been said many times today. And this is also a key moment at the European level as member states discuss the European Pact on Migration and Asylum that sets out the long-term vision for EU migration policy. This regional review provides a very key opportunity to highlight the child-sensitive guiding principles of the GCM and to assess how the Pact at the EU level and more in general regional policies and practice and align with the principle, the child-focused principles of the Compact. I would like to highlight 4 areas of priority that look at the implementation of the Compact itself and its child rights principles. The first one is to remind us about the centrality of the principle of best interest of the child and the importance of including concrete and necessary safeguards to operationalize this principle. So we know that it is a cornerstone of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and it's been also the cornerstone of and the GCM child-sensitive principles. And abiding to this requires that any migration decision, any policy and practice and programs are made in accordance with the best interest of the child, including policy and procedures regarding border management, regarding reception and care, regarding immigration detention, and safe and dignified return. So we are pleased, obviously, to see, for example, in the European Pact, the reference to the best interest of the child as a primary consideration. But again, we recommend that this principle is operationalized in practice through necessary safeguards. And it's also important to avoid that we adopt any approaches that appear to be binary, in which everyone who is likely to be denied asylum should be immediately returned or detained, because this would deprive children and families of the possibility of accessing pathway and other forms of international protection and regularization. The other key area for us, and it has been mentioned time and time again, is about immigration detention. It is well known and recognized that immigration detention has devastating effects on children, on their mental health, their well-being and development. And it is absolutely crucial that as we implement new policies, new programs, this doesn't lead to increased and de facto detention of children. We are concerned, for example, that children aged 12 to 18 in certain circumstances might risk being detained through the new border procedures. It is important that this doesn't happen, and explicit safeguards aiming at having no child detention are put in place. Thirdly is about family reunification. We do know that the GCM, for example, identified family reunification as a key and safe and regular pathway open to children and families. And it's absolutely crucial to ensure that this pathway is still open for children. And it is crucial that we eliminate administrative barriers and obstacles for children and families. So we recommend that all states implement such policy in the best interest of the child as a matter of urgency. And I would like to mention that, fourthly, the impact of COVID on children in migration. We have seen across the world an increase of violence against children, and many children, particularly children who are so vulnerable, such as children in migration, have had their education interrupted. It is absolutely crucial to invest and focus on access to education for all children, but also services that address their needs in terms of psychosocial support and work around violence and gender-based violence as well. So, to conclude, full implementation of the best interests of the child, exclusive use of alternatives to child migration detention, build on the use of family reunification as safe and regular route, and develop child and gender-sensitive long-term responses to the pandemic, and involve children in each and every step. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that statement. I now give the floor. Can I ask you to switch off your microphone, please? Thank you. I give the floor now to the last speaker on the list before closing. This is Mr. Pablo Rojas Copari from the Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights of the OSCE. Can I ask you to be brief, since we want to give the floor back to the panelists also. Pablo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julian. I'll be indeed very brief. I just want to focus my intervention on two objectives, Objective 13 and Objective 11. As many interventions and panelists have already discussed in greatest length the issue of detention, I'll just basically touch upon 2 points. In particular, I would like to remind participants of the positive changes that we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of increased use of alternatives of detention and the release of detainees during this period. I think what is really important is that we reflect on those practices, while at the same time say how we can move along with those with increased usage of alternatives as provided by the Global Compact. I of course want to make a point around what was said already by multiple speakers in terms of the issue of child detention. It's a shame that 2 years onwards from the Global Compact adoption, we still see not only the practice of child detention in the region, but also that certain regional documents from regional actors are still calling or not outrightly banning the practice of child detention. And for the purpose of improving the availability of alternative and increasing the practice of alternatives, what we have found useful in the OSCE is the organization of peer review practices, and I'm happy to say that we are contributing to the work. We're contributing to the upcoming peer review exercise led by the UN Migration Network. In relation to Objective 11, I would like to say that it's a bit more serious that since the adoption of the Global Compact 2 years ago, what we have seen is an increased use of violence at borders across this region, and in particular at the borders of the European Union. And the incidents of violence are unacceptable and have led not only to physical harm, but also in many cases death. What we see is very well documented allegations of the role of member states in practicing pushbacks in the Aegean Sea, in the Central Mediterranean, and also at the doors of the European Union in the Western Balkan route. Unfortunately, there is very little oversight of what's going on at borders. The practices of border monitoring are still very poorly understood, and the role of human rights defenders in border monitoring is not very well protected. Activists, organizations, and other human rights defenders that are working on border monitoring are constantly being harassed, both legally, physically, and digitally, and there is very little protection on that. The OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights is currently undertaking research with the view of providing recommendations on the establishment of independent border monitoring mechanisms, which we'll be happy to share early next year. I think it's really important that we do not overlook the importance of having state actors monitored and held compliant for their actions at borders. In particular, also since there have been recent allegations of the role of some regional actors and regional agencies in their involvement in some of those pushbacks. And that, of course, and I conclude by saying this, if the Objective 11 and the practices at borders are not properly monitored, this has an impact as well on Objective 8 and the ability of saving lives at seas and at borders. So thank you for the opportunity for providing this intervention, and have a good continuation.
I thank you for that statement. Speakers list is now closed. We have a request, the right of reply from Armenia, Stoya Stepanaya. So you have the floor for the right of reply for 3 minutes. Can you please unmute your microphone and turn your camera off, if possible? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Armenia will be delivering a statement elaborating on implementation of GCM later today under agenda item 4 and panel 4. At this stage, we asked the right of reply to answer to cynical statement by Azerbaijan. Mr. Chair, on 27 September, Azerbaijan launched wide-scale military aggression with the aim to annihilate the indigenous Armenian population of Artsakh. Azerbaijan has created humanitarian catastrophe in our region, killing civilians and deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, and places of worship. Numerous reports, including the ones from Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, confirmed that the residential areas of Nagorno-Karabakh were bombed by cluster munitions, which is banned under international humanitarian law. Azerbaijan trafficked foreign terrorist fighters from Middle East to our region. This fact was previously confirmed by the President of France, the public statements of Russian security services, among other many trustworthy sources. Just 2 days ago, the UN Working Group on Mercenaries stated, and I quote, "There were widespread reports that the government of Azerbaijan, with Turkey's assistance, relied on Syrian fighters to shore up and sustain its military operations in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict zone, including in the front line." They added, and I quote, "In this context, it is even more worrisome that the Syrian fighters deployed to Azerbaijan allegedly affiliated with armed groups and individuals that in some cases have been accused of war crimes and serious human rights abuses during conflict in Syria, thus seemingly perpetrating the cycle of impunity and risking further abuses of international law," unquote. And coming back to the issue under today's discussion, let me remind that Azerbaijan is still on the center of yet another corruption-related scandal, this time related to state-sponsored slavery, trafficking, and exploitation against migrant workers from the Balkans. This case is, in the moment, is in European Court of Human Rights, awaiting final decision. Meanwhile, the recent publications by International Investigative Network, Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Network, contains shocking facts and testimonies of victims about the Azerbaijani way of dealing with migrants and human rights defenders who wish to voice concern about gross abuses and intimidation against migrant workers. For this stage, this is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm looking. It's a speakers list. There's a request. Ahmed Dogan, can you please? We cannot see for whom you requested the floor. I'll allow you to speak and just mention Mr. Dogan.
Hello, Julian. This is Ahmet Dogan from Turkish Permanent Mission in Geneva.
Okay. Do you have something you want to take the floor at this point or later on? Sorry.
I would like to use my right of reply if the claims.
Please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I would like to thank the UN Network on Migration, IOM and UNECE for organizing such an important event. Well, we are sure that the event will provide an impetus to the implementation of GCM and enrich the discussions in the other regional reviews. Indeed, our Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs delivered a speech in the opening session on Turkey's take on GCM, which also included insights about our approach on migration in general. The defining character, the backbone of this approach is the humanitarian dimension. And in the light of this spirit, I do not want to hijack the event, yet I felt obliged to reply the comments coming from Armenia and underline that we categorically reject the claims of Armenia. To highlight some bare facts very briefly, despite 4 UN Security Council resolutions which call for immediate, complete and unconditional withdrawal, Armenia continued to occupy 20% of Azerbaijan's territory. It caused displacement of 1 million people in the territories of Azerbaijan it occupied. Armenia has illegally settled in the region it occupies ethnic Armenians, some of them who have been brought from the Middle East, and attempted to change the demographic structure of the territories it has occupied. And by targeting the cities outside the occupied lands of Azerbaijan, Armenia has aimed to provoke Azerbaijan to retaliate on Armenia. Well, we hope that the agreement recently signed will be abided by Armenia, and the UN Security Council resolutions and also the other international resolutions calling for territorial integrity of Azerbaijan and withdrawal of occupying Armenian forces will be honored. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Turkey. With this, I'd like to thank all participants for their statements from the floor, including government stakeholders, and would like now to invite our distinguished panel, Ms. Mittal, to come back on the floor for a wrap-up and some final comments. As you have noted, we scheduled the session till 11:50, which is in 1 minute. Nevertheless, can we please ask interpreters to stay on for another 10 minutes? It would be much appreciated. So we would be finishing at noon. Ms. Mittal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julian, and thank you to all the speakers and the distinguished panelists. It's been a pleasure listening to all the comments and the very informed statements that have been made today. Most prominently, let me try to capture the essence of today's deliberations. And when I look at the statements made by Armenia, by Albania, which was signifying the importance of policies and strategies in preventing smuggling of migrants. Also, we had heard very good examples of the national strategy of safe migration that have been evolved in the region, which become good examples for emulation across the region, and including the economic and security aspects of migration were also highlighted by many speakers. There's a significant increase in to enter Albania on the borders with Greece, which we noted. And we also looked at the cross-border cooperation and signed the agreement that's been signed more recently between the countries. What's really important for us to look at the fact is that while looking at safe migration, we also have to make sure that we also facilitate the process of human rights. And in this context, it's important to note the statements that have been made by Mr. Felipe Gonzalez Morales, who very clearly articulated the importance of collaboration between governments, international stakeholders to enhance regional policies. I think this is a very important common theme that is being articulated by all the speakers. And the essence is the responsibility to save lives of migrants falls into states. And there is an obligation of the states to protect the human rights of migrants. But we also heard later from some of the speakers that it is important that we also provide for civilian oversight requirements, which is necessary, especially at the border areas. To strengthen response to trafficking persons should be in line with international standards, and to reduce capacity to save lives in seized conditions in detention centers raises significant concerns. To suspend forced returns during the pandemic is important because we need to save lives, and this may also lead to greater exacerbation of the pandemic. The importance of collaboration between governments, international stakeholders, and enhanced regional policies have also been articulated very clearly, and the responsibility to save lives of migrants is prominently within the framework of the human rights of the migrants, and this is also the threat and the essence of the global compact that is being articulated, which is extremely important to keep in mind in all of the recommendations that we make. We need to strengthen response to trafficking persons, especially to make sure that the most vulnerable people are not exploited. And there was also a statement made earlier that we need to have a fine balance between looking at solidarity and fairness. And I would say not just solidarity and fairness, but to make sure that at the heart of the response, we put the lives of people, which is extremely important part of the overall response. To make sure that the detention on children whose parents are detained should not be justified with the situation. Detention is a violation of child rights. And this was very clearly articulated by several speakers today, including by Ms. Afshan Khan, when she said children and youth are central to the issues of migration. The compact is child sensitive and is rooted in the rights of the child. CRC clearly articulates that no child should be put into detention. Migrant children can be full members of the societies and they should be allowed to participate in the process. And there were many examples given where basic services are provided to the migrants, including to children. And I think what really resonated very well with all of what I believe is that children are most at risk, but also they're most in need. And we need to make sure that the response also takes into account the age-specific responses, including in the current pandemic situation. And we need to also look at children and youth are able to articulate their needs, and children can become full members and participate in the entire process. And one of the most prominent statements that was made was take all measures to avoid detention of children, which I think is being articulated by both by Save the Children Fund, by UNHCR, and many other speakers today. We also heard from Azerbaijan, where we had some development of national strategy on migration, which has been articulated. We also talked about, when the state controlled illegal migration issues. And from Canada, we heard a very important recommendation for us. On one hand, we need to have 8 specific recommendations made, but also to look at a gender-responsive approach to migration management and recognize women and girls as actors of change, and address gender vulnerabilities in trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants, and apply the gender lens in developing national legislation and strategies. None of the policies can be gender neutral, or and if they are not responsive to the special needs of women and children, we fail in being able to protect their rights also. We also heard again from some of the actors or some of the speakers today that we need to look at taking security issues into consideration while working on countering crimes, which is really looking at the whole continuum of care and response, because we need to prevent, we need to protect, and we also need to prosecute. But on the other hand, make sure that we don't have disproportionality of the way in which we respond, which is extremely important, and establish greater partnerships with transit countries to fight with trafficking countries, fight on prevention of trafficking of persons and also smuggling of migrants. So we need to look at a real compact between source, transit, and destination countries. And this is extremely important to also make sure that we emphasize a lot more on the appropriateness of the identity documents, which becomes also a source to make sure that people have access to basic services. And this is extremely important. And this requires greater collaboration between the source, transit, and destination countries to make sure that we have a greater agreement on how do we look at the identity documents. Once again, what was also highlighted by UNHCR was that we need to, and also by UNICEF, is that needs of returned children should be addressed, including psychological support. Some of the children grow up in destination countries, but they may not have a connect, and therefore it's extremely important to have individual plans being developed for children so that we can be more responsive to their special needs. We also heard from many of the speakers that, especially in the context of the pandemic, that we want to make sure that because there is increased vulnerabilities and because of closure of borders, it also increases the vulnerabilities to more increased smuggling of migrants and also trafficking of persons. And therefore, it's important that the policies and strategies in border management and detention are also laced with more human rights perspectives, but at the same time to make sure that we have a fine balance between safe migration, orderly migration, and also prevention and trafficking of human beings as well as of the smuggling of migrants. The issues of family reunification and elimination of administrative barriers for children to reunite with families was also articulated during the course of today's discussions, and to prevent violence against children and access to education and psychosocial support continue to be one of the themes that was also articulated by several speakers today. And let me just in sum say that I think what we're talking about that when we want safe and orderly migration to happen, we need to make sure, that we need to come together. And we have much more coordinated, cooperative approaches. And it's my firm belief that if we want to go far, we need to work together to make sure that we can have consistency of messaging. Secondly, put in place and make the human rights principles central to all of the response that we do for making sure that we are able to save lives and make sure that people have due dignity and respect. And so we're talking about people when they move because they're pushed because of the circumstances. And when we look at people who are when you close the borders, we also are aware of the fact that sometimes the cost of migration or the irregular migration increases and the vulnerabilities of human trafficking also increase. Let me just take 1 minute and say that coming from working in Central Asian countries and also I've worked in South Asia, clearly whenever there are economic crises, the vulnerabilities of women and children increased many folds. We also know from the conflict situations in Syria and Iraq, those people who moved, they moved with many, they unwittingly ended up being in the conflict areas. So we have to fully understand that some people who move don't move often out of choice, but actually because they're pushed because of their circumstances. And COVID-19 is one such situation where the vulnerability is increased. So it's important that we have prevention. We also have in place protection, but also have systems in place that look at the whole continuum within the overall criminal justice response. But central to that is really looking at the human rights principles and a gender-based response, and also looking at age-appropriate responses, including protecting the rights of children. And while we look at safer border management, which is important for sovereignty of states, we need to make sure that we also put human beings at the center of that response. Thank you very much. Unless anybody of the panelists would like to add to what I said, I invite if any of the three panelists would like to add to what I've summarized. Mr. Gonzalez, Morales, anything from your side?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Mittal. As our distinguished moderator was pointed out, there were many important statements made from the floor, and because of the scarcity of time, I just would like to make one point that was also raised during the discussion. Sorry. You may have noticed that we, the special procedures, special rapporteurs, independent experts, those who have a thematic mandate, we have not been able to conduct country visits during the pandemic. And this implies that we are not able to publish, to present country reports on our respective fields to the Human Rights Council. In this context, I think it becomes especially acute to fully guarantee the role of the national mechanisms to conduct such independent monitoring, meaning the national human rights institutions and the civil society. It is in this regard indispensable that they are allowed to conduct their monitoring activities without any kind of obstacle, and to have full access to information, even in the context of the pandemic. I think that the amount of the violation of the human rights of migrants during the pandemic is extremely grave, and independent monitoring should be ensured at all times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Morales. Ms. Afshan Khan, any last statement from your side?
The Children for an Effective Asylum System has really come out very strongly. And I also think that the addressing children's needs and investing in safeguards, procedures, and capacities that address both vulnerabilities and leverage potential will be increasingly important going forward. I do think many of the recommendations that were made to give priority to unaccompanied children for relocation in emergency scale-up mechanisms will be important, and also to the whole gender dimensions that I think you very eloquently captured, and gender-based violence and specific protection measures that are effective and humane, particularly for Europe's external borders, and transiting within Europe will be extremely important. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Khadaj. Any last comments from your side?
I think Mr. Khadaj has had to leave.
Okay, yeah. So with this, thank you very much for inviting all of us. And I think we have some very important recommendations to the GCM, and we hope that these will be actualized, including the request for looking at the whole issue of oversight, and to make sure that the national processes are put in place to make sure that the Global Compact recommendations are fully honored by the members states, and also to look at how we can support these and put them in action, so it's not on paper, but we become responsive to the key constituents, the people for whom we are serving. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the panelists, moderator, Ms. Mittal, Ms. Khan, Mr. Gonzalez Morales, and Mr. Khadaj from Albania. This concludes Roundtable 3 of the Regional Review Europe. We resume at 1:30 for Roundtable 4. You are invited to stay on in this session or to log out and come in back again. We'll have another familiarization session half an hour prior to the start. So at 1300, we will have a familiarization session for those who want to test their microphones on Roundtable 4. With this, I conclude this session. Thank you very much. Thanks to the interpreters for their overtime. Thank you very much.